House of the Dragon, it's about a power struggle for the throne. The King Viserys chooses a female heir, breaking a century of tradition, and the realm disputes that.
Can a woman sit the Iron Throne as ruling queen? It had not been done at that point in the history of Westeros. This is a little different here.
Daemon was not made to wear the crown, but I believe that you were.
The only thing that could tear down the House of the Dragon was itself.
As in any great tale out of George's world, it's about a power struggle for the throne. But the unique one about this one is that instead of it being one family fighting another family, this story is about the Targaryens fighting themselves.
170 years in the past, the height of the Targaryen Empire, King Viserys loses his wife and his attempt to produce a male heir, and so names his daughter Rhaenyra the heir to the throne.
The show will cover some years. As kids are born, they grow up, they become young people, they have kids of their own. So there is a significant number of time jumps in House of the Dragon.
It's really just the story of one family. And, you know, there are 4 or 5 real main characters, and those are our focus.
We definitely get to see their culture, which is, you know, they're closer to gods than to men. It's a very decadent time. It's a more rich time. There have been 60 years of peace, so you get to see what the realm looks like before it descends into the kind of detritus and post-decadence of war that you see in the original series.
There's definitely an air of exclusivity that they try to maintain by keeping themselves to themselves. And I guess one of the themes of this story is that that's just not really a great idea in the long run.
10 years you've been king, and yet not once have you asked me to be your hand.
Why would I do that?
Because I'm your brother. And the blood of the dragon runs thick.
2 brothers, Viserys the older one, Daemon the younger, grown up together, obviously had a very close relationship with probably quite a difficult father.
Viserys the First, who is the king, he is the heir that was chosen by the Great Council. When Jaehaerys passes away, he takes over, and he is now reigning over the 7 kingdoms.
He really wants everyone around him to be kind to each other and to have a nice time, and they just will refuse to do that.
Viserys has always looked after Daemon, or seen him more as his wayward child rather than his brother.
I have spent a lifetime defending you, but your heart is even blacker than I thought.
Daemon is arguably the most fascinating character in this whole tale. He's mercurial, he's unpredictable, and that kind of manifests as restlessness, sometimes violence.
Beginning tonight, King's Landing will learn to fear the color gold.
He has this very close relationship with his niece. She adores him.
Now, you and I both own a small piece of our ancestry.
Rhaenyra Targaryen is the eldest living child of King Viserys Targaryen I.
She is more a rebel without a cause to begin with. The cause is what she finds over the course of the season.
She's a dragon rider. She enjoys her position, being princess where she is.
You aren't worried about your position? I like this position. It's quite comfortable.
Alicent Hightower is a daughter of Otto Hightower, the Hand of the King. And Alicent is a pretty young girl, vivacious, very bright.
She believes in what's gone before, and men are the leaders of society, and she's completely fine with that.
I believe I'm quite content as a spectator. Thank you.
And then I think her slow journey is realizing that every single man that she finds lets her down in a major way.
Alicent and Rhaenyra grew up together, so the idea is that they have this really deep, special bond that kind of only teenage girls can have. But what's going to happen is that the forces of the patriarchy are going to conspire to get in between them and drive that relationship apart.
Dragons in this are symbolic of a number of things. The reason that the Targaryens are considered as being closer to gods is because of their dragons and their weapons of mass destruction.
Dragons are really formidable, and they can turn the tide of a battle. So the dragons and fear of dragons was one of the things that made the Targaryens very secure in their power.
You've come for the egg.
Here it is.
But what we did a lot of work on was creating dragon infrastructure. So, for instance, there's a dragon pit, there's a place to house the dragons, there are dragon keepers to look after and tend to the dragons. This is a time where there are entire jobs and professions around the care and feeding of dragons, and I think that's part of the way you dramatize the fact that they exist and they're a fact of day-to-day life in this time.
I genuinely hope that audiences are open to watching a new chapter in the Game of Thrones saga that will be familiar yet different. It's the ride that everybody wants. I feel incredibly loyal and responsible to the original show. I have a great kind of desire to even be in the same room as that show because it was a game changer.
George and his writing was a huge influence on me. It's an incredible feeling to achieve my dream job. You get that great call, which is the thing that every writer is hoping for, telling you we're going to go make this thing. And you're happy for a few seconds. And then you realize the responsibility that's on your shoulders.
I'm excited. It's always a little apprehensive when you turn your baby over to foster parents, but I'm involved in this. It's great to have Ryan, who's a great writer and someone who really knew my world. He's going to do his best to remain faithful to it. I knew Miguel Sapochnik was an amazing director. He'd won an Emmy, he'd done some of our best episodes. There's always a little suspense to how good is it going to be. But I think I'm in good hands with Ryan and Miguel.
The idea of going back to Westeros was almost too much of a challenge. You have to start by respecting it. You can't start by doing different for different sake.
He saw some of the things that I saw, and it wasn't just a prequel for prequel's sake. There was actually a reason to tell this story.
It really was seeing it through a different perspective that interested me.
Men would sooner put the realm to the torch than see a woman ascend the Iron Throne.
George's work really is a truly immersive world. There's unexplored deep recesses and thousands of years of history.
Realizing what worked in Thrones, what didn't. What do we want to better? How do we want to evolve?
The biggest sets I've ever been on, the biggest locations I've ever been on, the biggest crews I've ever seen, it's staggering. We do really see the creative world very similarly.
We're going to start just a more grounded, more intimate way.
We're going to go off and go on this great adventure together.
What a great new chapter in the Game of Thrones saga.
When I got a call saying that they were making this show that was set 200 years before Game of Thrones, I was really interested.
When I got the gig, for that split second, you're like, oh my God, you're in Game of Thrones, it's the biggest thing ever. Then you put the phone down, you're like, oh God, now I've got to do it.
Game of Thrones has such a history and a fan base and a culture that exists beyond it and around it.
It's the biggest TV show, so yeah, so there's a bit of pressure to live up to.
How do we make Thrones but not Thrones? What's good about Thrones? What worked in Thrones? What didn't? What do we want to better? How do we want to evolve the style?
It wasn't just a prequel for prequel's sake. There was actually a reason to tell this story. The Targaryens are the fascinating dynasty that we don't really know much about from the original books because at that point they've all died out. There was this once great day where there were dozens of Targaryens running around and a bunch of dragons, and they ruled over Westeros. It was a time of peace and prosperity, and everybody knew that if you messed with the Targaryens, you would get the dragons, so nobody dared to overthrow them. This period in Westeros was a very decadent time, so you get to see what the realm looks like before it descends into the detritus and post-decadence of war that you see in the original series. So I was fascinated in going back to that time and seeing the Targaryens at their height, and learning what it was that Daenerys lost in trying to win back throughout the story.
The original Game of Thrones was very much an epic that was weaving together various different threads.
It still has that scale and scope, but it's really just the story of one family slowly tearing itself apart.
There's a wish fulfillment for an audience of things they want to see. We're not here to not give it to them. We're here to give them the thing that they want, just not in the way that they're expecting.
We're not trying to rehash the past. We're trying to find something fresh and exciting.
We wanted to very much embrace the feel and the world of Game of Thrones, but we had the flexibility to enlarge and enhance. But there was this very strong feeling that we wanted the audience to feel they're in the same show.
The first time I walked on set where King's Landing's been built, I feel that no one told them that that isn't how films are made now, that you don't have to build the whole castle. But no, it's all there and it's all in the right place.
You read the script at home and you imagine the scene, and then when you come in, it's always twice the size you imagined it.
You walk around these sets that look like ancient monuments and buildings with massive statues, or you can be on these amazing locations. You cannot believe that this is on the earth somewhere this extraordinary.
The other series of Game of Thrones was absolutely brilliant, and the costumes were brilliant. So it was not a question of doing better, it was just a question of doing something beautiful.
We had said to ourselves, we're going to pull our horns in on season 1. We're going to start in a more grounded, more intimate way. But even with our horns pulled in, it was just big.
One of the many beautiful things that George did with his creation of Westeros is it really feels three-dimensional and fully realized, and that there's thousands of years of history, and you can get lost in a good way in the world of Westeros.
For me, the best fiction, the best drama is about characters. House of the Dragon is a story about very flawed human beings, capable of love and hate, capable of doing good things, capable of doing monstrous things.
I genuinely hope that audiences are open to watching a new chapter in the Game of Thrones saga.
Game of Thrones was its own thing, and it was a cultural phenomenon. But this is something else, it's a different story. The scale of the story is told in a different way.
All that size that we loved in Game of Thrones is here, but House of the Dragon is rooted in the domestic and the familial.
I hope fans will get everything that they got out of Game of Thrones and more. More dragons.
Dragons will rule the 7 kingdoms for the next 100 years.
Tráilers. Visita mi canal.
Just as they did the last.
The best fiction, the best drama is about characters. The story of House of the Dragon is a story about very flawed human beings, capable of doing good things, capable of doing monstrous things, capable of courage, capable of cowardice. These are the kind of characters that I love the most. Game of Thrones begins roughly 298 AC. Almost 300 years after Aegon's conquest. House of Dragon takes place a couple hundred years before Game of Thrones. Jaehaerys Targaryen, the old king who was the 4th Targaryen to rule over Westeros, he was only 14 when he ascended to the Iron Throne, and he ruled for 55 years. It was a very peaceful time in the history of Westeros. It was a time of prosperity. King's Landing really grew enormously. It was a good time. Viserys I, who is the heir that was chosen by the Great Council, when Jaehaerys passes away, he takes over, and he is now reigning over the 7 kingdoms. There were a lot of Targaryens at that point, and you can see how the seeds of war are sometimes planted in a time of peace. People die, and the sons take over for fathers as lords, and they don't necessarily think they're bound by their fathers' allegiances or decisions or vows. So little by little, the seeds are spreading. Game of Thrones focused on the Starks and the Lannisters. For House of the Dragon, the Targaryens themselves, the House of the Dragon, are at center, but 2 of the biggest players in the Dance with the Dragons Civil War are the Valerians and the Hightowers. In terms of history in Westeros, the Hightowers are the oldest. They've been there for thousands of years. Their seat of power is Old Town, which was for many hundreds and thousands of years the biggest city in Westeros. They're a very rich house. Old Town is wealthy from trade mostly. And in the center of it is the High Tower, for which the High Towers take their name. Lord Hightower is in Old Town, ruling over his domains in the city. But his younger brother, Otto Hightower, is the hand of the king when the story opens. Same position we saw Ned Stark play to Robert at the beginning of Game of Thrones. The Valerians were also a house from the Freehold of Valeria, the mightiest empire in at least the West in my world. And they actually arrived in Westeros before the Targaryens. They were not dragon lords, however. They were seafarers. At that time, the Freehold of Valeria depended a lot on its trade, and it was a good position to dominate trade from all the kingdoms of Westeros and from other places even further north. So they moved for reasons of trade and wealth. Corlys Velaryon is Lord Admiral and Master of Ships, as his own grandfather was before him of a similar name. So since Aegon's conquest, the Valerians have been very high in the councils of the House Targaryen. And after all his voyages, he's married to Rhaenys Targaryen, the queen who never was. House Targaryen and House Velaryon, they were close. There was a definite relationship between them. The Targaryens are also an ancient house, but they're not an ancient Westerosi house. They knew that destruction was coming to Valeria and went far away from the capital city, and they settled on the volcanic island of Dragonstone. They were dragon lords in Valeria. Now, dragons are really formidable, and they can turn the tide of a battle. It flies. It's difficult to hit. It breathes fire, against which most knights and men-at-arms have little or no protection. So if you have dragons, and that's where the nuclear option analogy comes in, you're hard to mess around with. So the dragons and fear of dragons was one of the things that made the Targaryens very secure in their power.
Dragon Saddle's one thing, but the Iron Throne is the most dangerous seat in the realm.
Do hereby name Rhaenyra Targaryen, heir to the Iron Throne.
The Targaryens are the sort of fascinating dynasty that we don't really know much about from the original books, because at that point they've all died out.
I don't even know where I first mentioned the idea of a Targaryen civil war called the Dance with the Dragons. But Ryan and Miguel and I have been working together, and it's exciting.
Well, as any great tale out of George's world, it's about a power struggle for the throne. But the unique one about this one is that instead of it being one family fighting another family, like Lannisters fighting the Starks, this story is about the Targaryens fighting themselves.
We were 200 years in the past, but we were at the height of the Targaryen Empire, which was a time of decadence, and by definition, the height of an empire usually means the height of its technology, the height of its hubris. We had to show this idea that this was an opulent and decadent group of people, no war for 60 years. I mean, they're a happy bunch.
And everybody knew that if you messed with the Targaryens, you would get the dragons, so nobody dared to overthrow them.
I, Lord Hobart Hightower, promise to be faithful to King Viserys.
It took a lot of doing, but we were able to put together a hell of a cast.
We're looking for very specific people, so the very first person we wanted was Paddy Considine.
I think Viserys struggles with being the king. Viserys feels a duty to keep peace amongst the kingdoms. Being king is a very difficult seat to be in. Viserys has an awareness of just how dangerous it is to sit on the Iron Throne.
Targaryen must understand this to be king. Or queen.
Rhaenyra is strong-minded. She's smart. I think she's underestimated.
You have dragon riders, father.
She realizes that the women within the kingdom spend their entire lives serving to men. Oh, you need to be courted. So now I need to gain the attention of men so then I can produce another man. She wrestles with it. She doesn't like it. She doesn't agree with it.
Brother?
Daemon.
Daemon has a great affiliation and love and admiration for his brother, the king. But Daemon's all swords and knives, really. I do think on some level he wants to cause chaos. I think he's interested in chaos. I think he survives in chaos quite well.
3, 2, 1, action!
He's got a very, quite clear moral compass, and you're either in it or you're out of it.
It's named King's Landing because that's where Aegon the Conqueror, Aegon the Dragon, landed with his ships, and when he decided to begin the conquest of Westeros. And they built the Red Keep, which became the center of King's Landing in the place of the Targaryens and the Iron Throne.
In the original books, George always described the throne as being made from thousands of swords. I wanted to make a hybrid version that was closer to something that's described in the original book that still honored the throne from the original series.
It's a kind of a throne that says a statement. Look at my power. These are treasures of people I have killed or conquered.
Cameras are running.
When I walked into the throne room for the first time, there was a sort of moment that I had of like, oh wow, I'm on the Iron Throne.
For me, it's really this particular period in Westeros. It was a time of high decadence and peace and prosperity. So you get to see what the realm looks like before it descends into the post-decadence of war that you see in the original series.
Call is Velaryon.
I, Lord Hobart Hightower, promise to be faithful to King Viserys.
I swear this, by the old gods and the new.
Westeros is basically a feudal society. It's ruled by many noble houses, some of them going back hundreds or even thousands of years. Two of the biggest players are the Velaryons and the Hightowers.
The Hightowers are from a very ancient, wealthy, powerful household who have been front and center of politics for hundreds of years.
The Hightower sigil has a torch on it, and their motto is "We light the way." That comes across within the characters of the Hightowers.
Their seat of power is the southern coast, Old Town, which was for many thousands of years the biggest city in Westeros. The Faith was headquartered there for many years. That was where the High Septon, our equivalent of the Pope, had his seat.
Within the series, you have old gods and new gods, and the Seven is new religiosity, and the Hightowers have a strong connection with the High Septon.
When we first opened the series, Otto Hightower is Hand of the King, and I think there's a Hightower fire there.
There's a saying, when the king eats, the hand shits. He steers the small council on the king's behalf when it's necessary and ensures the king's wishes are enforced.
Otto's an advisor, but Viserys is quite suspicious of him.
Otto sees the danger in everything, and even though his intentions are good, he's also persuaded himself that there is nothing but good intention behind his action.
The gods have yet to make a man who lacks the patience for absolute power, Your Grace.
The Velaryons are of Valyrian blood, from the freehold of Valyria, the mightiest empire in the west. Destruction was coming to Valyria, the Doom, as it would later be called. And they actually arrived in Westeros before the Targaryens.
Hightide is a standalone castle belonging to Lord Corlys.
He's master of ships. He's the greatest sailor of the land. He's the one who's done these famous 9 voyages. The Velaryons control the greatest and strongest fleet.
The Sea Snake is a collector and a trophy hunter and very proud of his voyages, so he festoons his hall in all of the one objects from his 9 voyages across the Narrow Sea and beyond. The Sea Snake is the richest man in Westeros aside from the throne, but it's not quite good enough for him. He wants his blood on the throne.
He was there when Viserys was chosen as king. He felt it should have been his wife, and he's never really forgotten that.
The queen who never was. To have your husband as your champion, constantly saying it should have been you, it should have been you, it should have been her, is fantastic. There's a classic example of a healthy, strong marriage.
The Velaryons were not pleased by this, but when the realm is against you 20-1, you'd be pretty foolish to go to arms to try to press that. Jaehaerys did not want bloodshed. He wanted a smooth transition to his successor.
History does not remember blood. It remembers names.
Our power men should never have trifled with. One that brought Valyria its doom.
If we don't mind our own histories, it will do the same to us.
I was fascinated in going back to that time of high decadence and peace and prosperity and seeing the Targaryens at their height.
The height of an empire usually means the height of its technology, and so we had to show this idea that this was an opulent and decadent group of people.
So you get to see what the realm looks like before it descends into the detritus and post-decadence of war that you see in the original series. Jim and his team created this really immersive environment for not only the cast, but the crew to realize this world and again, immerse people into something.
The Red Keep composite was the jewel of the whole piece for me because that's where the bulk of the action is taking place in this season. So I introduced this big staircase as a sort of symbol of power, and that it was a sense of Parliament as well as just the home of the family. And the composite also allows lots of positions to observe the little pockets of conversations that are going on, to add to the intrigue and the conspiracy that must go on all the time in those places.
It's all built in, it's not on separate stages, which was really fun to play with, and it was incredible.
Wow, I've never been on a set like the Red Keep.
Part of the discussion about the Red Keep and all of the familiar locations, particularly the familiar sets, is I need to be able to shoot in every direction without it becoming a visual effect, and you can certainly do that on the Red Keep. We were 200 years in the past, and so Valerian architecture, we wanted it to be quite brutalist quality to the Targaryens, which then found its way to King's Landing, but is not very represented in the original show.
We have utilised some of the assets from Game of Thrones, but obviously the set decorate and design team, they want to create a fresh look. It's so relatable to Game of Thrones, but it's got to be its own entity. So stuff from their archive that wasn't used that we've repurposed and turned into something.
In terms of set decorating and creating a new world almost that has some elements of Game of Thrones running through it, I've been given the opportunity to actually play with that a little bit and come up with new ideas, and that's been really exciting.
All that size that we loved in Game of Thrones is here.
Dragon Saddle is one thing, but the Iron Throne is the most dangerous seat in the realm.
The throne is the big one for us on this, you know. It was very iconic in the Game of Thrones season. You know, you wanted to make sure you're doing it justice, but also improving it and doing what we can, and Ryan and Miguel were very involved in that from day one.
I was fascinated with this idea of what if the throne had changed over time in Westeros, and what if there was a whole story to tell about the kind of devolution of the throne to the thing that you see in the original series.
This was all about the power of the Targaryen dynasty, and so every element in that throne represented a fallen warrior.
The operatic quality meant we needed to reconfigure the throne room, and as a result, the throne kind of spread out and became this carpet of swords.
One of the many beautiful things that George did with his creation of Westeros is it really is a truly immersive world, and I'm really excited for everybody to see it.